Maya Chen had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent their evenings watching movies or scrolling through social media, she was in the dojo, perfecting her martial arts techniques. At 22, she had already earned black belts in 3 different disciplines and had won numerous regional competitions. Her small frame and quiet demeanor often fooled people into underestimating her, but those who knew her understood that beneath her gentle exterior lay the heart of a warrior. The trouble began on a seemingly ordinary Thursday evening when Maya decided to take a shortcut through the old industrial district on her way home from work. She had been putting in extra hours at the community center where she taught self-defense classes to young women, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. The familiar weight of her training knife, a blunted practice weapon she always carried for demonstrations, felt reassuring in her jacket pocket. As she walked down the dimly lit street, the sound of her footsteps echoed off the brick walls of abandoned warehouses. The area had a reputation for being rough, but Maya had never encountered any real problems before. She was confident in her abilities and knew she could handle most situations that might arise. However, tonight felt different. There was an electric tension in the air that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. 3 blocks from the main road, Maya noticed a group of 5 men emerging from the shadows between 2 buildings. They moved with the calculated swagger of people who were used to getting their way through intimidation. The leader, a tall man with multiple tattoos covering his arms, stepped directly into her path. His companions spread out in a semicircle, effectively cutting off any escape routes. The leader's eyes gleamed with malicious intent as he looked Maya up and down. He clearly saw her as an easy target, a young woman alone in a dangerous neighborhood, with nowhere to run. What he didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Maya had spent years training for moments exactly like this one, and despite the fear that began to creep into her chest, she felt her mind shift into the focused, calm state that her sensei had taught her. Without saying a word, one of the men moved closer and reached out to grab her purse. Maya's reflexes kicked in immediately, and she stepped back while simultaneously reaching for her practice knife. The familiar weight of the weapon in her hand gave her confidence, and she held it in a defensive position. The blade might have been blunted for safety during training, but it was still intimidating enough to make most people think twice. For a moment, the men hesitated. They hadn't expected their victim to be armed or to show any sign of resistance, but instead of backing down, their leader laughed mockingly. He pulled out a much larger knife from his own pocket, its blade gleaming under the streetlight. The message was clear. They weren't afraid of her little training weapon, and they had no intention of letting her go. What happened next changed everything. Before Maya could react, 2 of the men rushed her from different angles. In the struggle that followed, her practice knife was knocked from her hand and clattered across the pavement, disappearing into a storm drain. The weapon that had given her confidence was gone, leaving her facing 5 dangerous men with nothing but her bare hands and years of training. The leader smiled cruelly as he watched her weapon disappear. He clearly believed that without her knife, Maya was now completely helpless. He had no idea that by taking away her weapon, he had actually freed her to use the skills that were far more dangerous than any blade. Maya's sensei had always taught her that the most powerful weapon a person could possess was their own body, properly trained and disciplined. As the 5 men closed in around her, Maya felt something shift inside her. The fear that had been building in her chest transformed into something else entirely. A cold, focused determination that she had only felt a few times before in her life. She thought of all the young women she taught at the community center, girls who looked up to her and trusted her to show them how to protect themselves. She thought of her sensei, who had spent countless hours teaching her that true strength came not from weapons or size, but from inner discipline and proper technique. The industrial district around them seemed to fade away as Maya's vision narrowed, to focus solely on her opponents. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady and strong as she prepared for what was about to unfold. The men thought they had cornered a helpless victim, but they were about to discover that they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Maya Chen was no longer just a young woman walking home from work. She had become a force of nature, and these 5 men were about to learn why underestimating her was the last mistake they would ever make. The first attacker made his move with overconfident aggression, lunging forward with his arms outstretched to grab Maya. He was bigger than her by at least 50 pounds, and clearly expected his size advantage to end the fight quickly. But Maya had faced larger opponents countless times in the dojo, and she knew that size meant nothing without proper technique and speed. As the man reached for her, Maya shifted her weight to her back foot and pivoted sharply to the left. The movement was so fluid and natural that it seemed almost like a dance step. The attacker's momentum carried him forward into empty space, while Maya positioned herself at his side. Before he could recover his balance, she drove her elbow upward into his solar plexus with devastating precision. The impact knocked the wind out of him instantly, and he doubled over, gasping for air. Maya didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. While he was still bent over, she brought her knee up sharply, connecting with his chin with a satisfying crack. The man's head snapped back and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even hit the pavement. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds, and the remaining 4 attackers stared in shock. They had expected their friend to easily overpower the small woman, not to watch him get dropped like a sack of potatoes. The leader's confident smirk began to fade as he realized that this girl was not the easy victim they had thought she was. But there was no time to process what had just happened, because the second attacker was already moving. This one was smarter than his friend and approached more cautiously, keeping his guard up and trying to circle around to Maya's blind spot. He had clearly had some fighting experience either in prison or on the streets, and he wasn't going to underestimate her the way his companion had. Maya watched his movements carefully, noting the way he shifted his weight and the position of his hands. Her sensei had taught her to read an opponent's intentions through their body language, and she could see that this man was planning to try to get behind her and put her in a chokehold. It was a common street fighting tactic, and one that had probably worked for him many times before. When he made his move, darting to her left side, Maya was ready. She spun around to face him head-on, but instead of backing away or trying to defend herself, she stepped directly into his attack. The unexpected aggression caught him completely off guard, and before he could adjust his strategy, Maya grabbed his outstretched arm with both hands. Using his own momentum against him, she pivoted her entire body and threw him over her shoulder, in a perfect judo throw. The man flew through the air and landed hard on his back on the unforgiving concrete, the impact driving all the air from his lungs. Before he could even think about getting up, Maya was on top of him, applying a blood choke that her Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor had drilled into her thousands of times. The man struggled desperately, his hands clawing at Maya's arms as he tried to break free from the hold. But Maya's technique was flawless, and within seconds the lack of blood flow to his brain began to take effect. His struggles grew weaker and weaker until finally, he went limp. Maya held the choke for 2 more seconds to make sure he was completely unconscious, then released him and stood up. 2 down, 3 to go. The fight had been going on for less than 10 seconds, and already Maya had eliminated nearly half of her opponents. But she wasn't feeling overconfident. She knew that the remaining 3 men would be more cautious now, and they might try to attack her all at once instead of one by one. The leader was no longer smiling. His eyes had gone cold and hard as he watched 2 of his men go down in rapid succession. He gestured to his remaining companions, and Maya could see them spreading out to try to surround her. They were learning from their mistakes and adapting their strategy, which made them more dangerous. Maya moved quickly to prevent them from boxing her in. She stepped back toward the wall of one of the warehouses, keeping all 3 men in front of her where she could see them. The wall at her back eliminated the possibility of being attacked from behind, but it also cut off her escape routes. It was a calculated risk, but one that played to her strengths. The third attacker was the youngest of the group, probably not much older than Maya herself. He had a nervous energy about him that suggested this might have been one of his first times participating in something like this. His inexperience showed in the way he kept glancing at the leader for guidance instead of focusing on his opponent. When the leader gave him a sharp nod, the young man rushed forward with wild, undisciplined swings. His punches were powerful but telegraphed, giving Maya plenty of time to see them coming. She ducked under his first swing and stepped inside his guard, getting close enough to neutralize his reach advantage. From this position, Maya unleashed a devastating combination that she had practiced thousands of times. A sharp uppercut to his liver made him gasp in pain, followed immediately by a hook to his kidney that made his knees buckle. As he started to fall, Maya caught him by the shoulders and brought her knee up into his midsection with all the force she could muster. The young man collapsed to his hands and knees, retching and struggling to breathe. Maya didn't want to hurt him more than necessary since he seemed like he might have been pressured into this situation, but she couldn't afford to show mercy when two dangerous opponents still remained. She grabbed a handful of his hair and drove her knee into his face, breaking his nose and rendering him unconscious. 3 down. The leader and one remaining thug stared at her in disbelief as their third companion hit the ground. What had started as what they thought would be an easy mugging had turned into a nightmare, and they were beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. The leader's face had transformed from cruel confidence to cold fury. His carefully planned robbery was falling apart, and 3 of his men were lying unconscious on the ground at the feet of a woman he had dismissed as an easy target. The respect and fear he commanded on the streets was built on his reputation for never backing down from a fight, and he couldn't afford to let word get out that he had been humiliated by someone half his size. His remaining companion, a heavy-set man with scarred knuckles and prison tattoos, was beginning to look nervous. He kept glancing between Maya and the unconscious bodies of his friends, clearly questioning whether continuing this fight was worth the risk. But the leader's harsh glare kept him from backing down. In their world, showing weakness or abandoning your crew was a death sentence. Maya could see the calculation going on in their minds. She had hoped that after seeing what happened to their friends, the remaining 2 would cut their losses and run. But she could tell from their body language that they were preparing for a final, desperate assault. They knew that their only chance now was to overwhelm her with brute force before she could pick them off one by one. The leader pulled out a second knife, longer and more wicked-looking than the first one he had shown her. The blade caught the streetlight as he held it in a reverse grip, clearly intending to use it for close-quarter slashing rather than stabbing. His companion cracked his knuckles and rolled his shoulders, preparing to use his considerable size advantage to try to pin Maya down while the leader worked with the blade. Maya felt her heart rate increase as she assessed this new threat. Fighting unarmed opponents was one thing, but facing a knife changed the entire dynamic of the encounter. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and she could end up with a fatal wound. Her sensei had taught her knife defense techniques, but he had always emphasized that the best defense against a blade was to run, if at all possible. But running wasn't an option now. The wall was still at her back, and the 2 men had positioned themselves to block any escape route. She was going to have to fight her way out, and she was going to have to do it perfectly. There would be no margin for error when facing a knife-wielding opponent who had nothing left to lose. The leader said something in a low voice to his companion, and Maya saw them exchange a quick nod. They were coordinating their attack, planning to come at her from different angles simultaneously. It was smart strategy. Even if she could handle one of them, dealing with both at the same time would be nearly impossible for most people. But Maya wasn't most people. She had spent years training specifically for situations like this, drilling scenarios where she faced multiple attackers with superior weapons and size. Her instructors had pushed her to her limits again and again, teaching her that when faced with impossible odds, the key was to create chaos and use her opponent's advantages against them. The attack came suddenly and without warning. The heavy-set man charged straight at her while the leader moved in from the side, knife held low and ready to slice upward. They had timed their assault perfectly, giving Maya less than 2 seconds to react to both threats simultaneously. Maya's response was instantaneous and brutal. Instead of trying to defend against both attacks, she chose to meet the knife wielder head-on, knowing that eliminating the most dangerous threat had to be her first priority. She threw herself directly at the leader, ducking under his initial slash and driving her shoulder into his midsection with all her momentum behind it. The impact drove him backward, but Maya wasn't finished. She grabbed his knife hand with both of hers, controlling the weapon while simultaneously driving her knee into his ribs. She could feel bones crack under the impact, and the leader grunted in pain, but his grip on the knife remained firm. Behind, Maya could hear the heavy footsteps of the larger man as he closed the distance between them. She had maybe 2 seconds before he reached her and grabbed her from behind. With the leader's knife still a deadly threat, she couldn't afford to get caught between them. Maya made a split-second decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. She released the leader's knife hand and spun around to face the charging heavyweight, leaving her back temporarily exposed to the blade. It was an incredibly risky move, but it was the only way to prevent herself from being trapped between two opponents. The big man had expected to grab her from behind while she was distracted with the knife. He wasn't prepared for her to turn and face him, and his surprise cost him precious milliseconds. Maya stepped inside his reach and drove a vicious uppercut into his throat, targeting his windpipe with surgical precision. The man's eyes bulged as he struggled to breathe, his hands instinctively going to his damaged throat. Maya didn't give him a chance to recover. She grabbed his shirt and used his forward momentum to help her drive her knee into his solar plexus, then followed up with a devastating elbow strike to the base of his skull. The big man crumpled like his nervous system had been unplugged, hitting the ground with a tremendous crash that echoed off the warehouse walls. Maya spun back around to face the leader, expecting to see him coming at her with a knife. Instead, she found him several feet away, clutching his ribs and breathing heavily. The leader looked around at his fallen companions, then back at Maya. For the first time since the encounter began, she saw something in his eyes that she recognized: fear. He was beginning to understand that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. This wasn't some helpless victim he could intimidate and rob. This was a predator in her own right, and she had just systematically dismantled his entire crew. 4 down, 1 to go. Maya could see the leader's grip on the knife tightening as he prepared for what both of them knew would be the final phase of their confrontation. The easy robbery he had planned had become a fight for survival, and only one of them was going to walk away from this alley. The leader stood alone among the unconscious bodies of his crew, his chest rising and falling with labored breathing. The knife trembled slightly in his hand. Whether from rage, fear, or the pain of his cracked ribs, Maya couldn't tell. What she could tell was that he was a cornered animal now, and that made him infinitely more dangerous than when he had felt confident and in control. Maya's sensei had always taught her that the most critical moment in any fight was when victory seemed assured. That was when people made mistakes, when they let their guard down and assumed the outcome was inevitable. Looking at the leader now, Maya knew that this final confrontation would be the most dangerous part of the entire encounter. The man's eyes darted around the alley, taking in the destruction Maya had wrought in less than a minute. His carefully assembled crew, men who had followed him through countless crimes and had never questioned his leadership, were scattered around him like broken dolls. The reputation he had built over years of intimidation and violence was crumbling before his eyes. Maya could practically see the gears turning in his head as he processed his options. He could try to run, but that would mean abandoning his men and destroying his credibility forever. He could try to negotiate, but his pride and the street code he lived by wouldn't allow him to show weakness to someone he had tried to victimize. That left him with only one choice: to fight until one of them couldn't continue. The leader straightened up slowly, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. When he spoke, his voice was low and deadly serious, stripped of the mocking confidence he had shown earlier. He told Maya that she had made a big mistake, that she didn't know who she was dealing with, and that he was going to make her pay for what she had done to his crew. Maya didn't respond to his threats. She had learned long ago that words were just another weapon that bullies use to intimidate their victims, and she had no intention of giving him any psychological advantage. Instead, she focused on reading his body language, watching for the telltale signs that would indicate when and how he planned to attack. The leader began to circle slowly to his left, trying to find an angle of attack that would give him the best chance with the knife. Maya turned to keep him in front of her, her movements economical and controlled. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her system, but her breathing remained steady and her mind clear. This was what all those years of training had been preparing her for. When the attack came, it was sudden and vicious. The leader feinted to his right, then immediately reversed direction and came at her from the left, the knife describing a deadly arc toward her midsection. It was a move that had probably worked for him many times before, catching opponents off guard with the sudden change in direction. But Maya had been watching his feet, not his hands, and she saw the attack coming before he even began the feint. She stepped back just far enough to let the blade whistle past her stomach, then immediately stepped forward again, closing the distance between them while the knife was still extended and out of position. Maya's left hand shot out like a striking snake, grabbing the leader's wrist and controlling the knife while her right hand drove forward in a devastating palm strike to his nose. She felt the cartilage crumple under the impact, and blood immediately began pouring down his face. But the leader was tougher than his subordinates, and the broken nose only seemed to make him angrier. He tried to wrench his knife hand free from Maya's grip, using his superior strength to overpower her. For a moment it seemed like he might succeed. Maya could feel her hold starting to slip as he twisted and pulled with desperate intensity. If he got the weapon free, she would be in serious trouble. Maya made another split-second decision that defied conventional wisdom. Instead of trying to maintain her grip on his wrist, she suddenly released it and stepped inside his guard, getting so close that the knife became useless. Before the leader could adjust to this new development, Maya grabbed him by the shoulders and drove her knee up into his solar plexus with tremendous force. The impact doubled him over, and Maya immediately followed up with a devastating elbow, strike to the back of his neck. The leader staggered but somehow managed to stay on his feet, swinging the knife wildly in an attempt to create some space between them. One of his wild swings came dangerously close to Maya's face, close enough that she could feel the displaced air from the blade's passage. Maya realized that she needed to end this fight quickly. The leader was more skilled and determined than his subordinates, and the longer the fight went on, the greater the chance that he would get lucky with the knife. She needed to create an opening for a finishing move, and she needed to do it now. She pretended to stumble backward, as if the near miss with the knife had rattled her. The leader's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction as he saw what appeared to be his opponent showing weakness for the first time. He pressed forward aggressively, raising the knife overhead for a powerful downward strike that he was sure would end the fight. But Maya's stumble had been entirely calculated. As the leader committed to his overhead attack, she explosively reversed direction and launched herself forward. Her shoulder drove into his midsection just as his arm was reaching the top of its arc, completely disrupting his balance and timing. The leader went down hard with Maya on top of him, and the knife flew from his hand to clatter away across the pavement. For a moment they struggled on the ground as he tried to buck her off and she tried to establish a dominant position. But Maya's grappling skills were far superior to his, and within seconds, she had secured a rear naked choke. The leader clawed desperately at her arms as the choke began to take effect, but Maya's technique was perfect. She had positioned herself so that he couldn't reach her face or eyes, and her legs were wrapped around his torso to prevent him from rolling over. Slowly, but inevitably, his struggles grew weaker as the blood flow to his brain was cut off. When he finally went limp, Maya held the choke for a few extra seconds to make sure he was completely unconscious. Then she released him and stood up, breathing heavily as she looked around at the aftermath of the confrontation. 5 men lay unconscious around her, and the entire fight had lasted exactly 83 seconds from beginning to end. Maya stood in the middle of the alley, surrounded by the unconscious forms of her 5 attackers, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the fight was beginning to fade, replaced by the trembling aftershocks that always followed intense physical confrontation. Her knuckles were scraped and bleeding, and she could feel the beginning of what would probably be several large bruises. But she was alive and unharmed. The silence in the alley was almost deafening after the violence of the previous minute and a half. Maya could hear the distant sounds of traffic from the main road and the hum of electrical transformers on the power lines overhead, but the industrial district around her remained deserted. No curious faces appeared at windows. No sirens wailed in the distance. In this forgotten corner of the city, her life or death struggle had gone completely unnoticed by the outside world. Maya pulled out her cell phone with hands that were still shaking slightly and dialed 911. When the operator answered, she reported the attempted robbery and assault, giving her location as precisely as she could. The operator asked if anyone was injured, and Maya looked around at the 5 unconscious men before answering that the attackers would probably need medical attention, but that she was unharmed. While she waited for the police and paramedics to arrive, Maya retrieved her practice knife from the storm drain where it had fallen during the initial struggle. The familiar weight of the training weapon in her hand brought back the memory of how the fight had started, when she had felt confident with the blade in her grip. Now she realized that losing the knife had actually been a blessing in disguise. If she had tried to fight 5 men while armed with a weapon, even a blunted one, the legal consequences could have been much more serious. The first police car arrived within 10 minutes, followed quickly by 2 more patrol units and an ambulance. The officers approached the scene cautiously, their hands near their weapons as they took in the sight of 5 unconscious men scattered around a young woman who appeared remarkably calm given the circumstances. Maya raised her hands slowly to show that she wasn't armed and waited for the officers to secure the scene. She knew that the initial moments of any police encounter were critical, and despite being the victim in this situation, she wanted to make sure there were no misunderstandings that could escalate the situation. The lead officer, a veteran sergeant, with gray hair and tired eyes, looked around at the unconscious attackers with obvious amazement. He asked Maya if she was responsible for all of this, and when she nodded, he shook his head in disbelief. He had seen plenty of crime scenes in his 20-year career, but he had never seen anything quite like this. The paramedics began checking on the 5 attackers, and Maya was relieved to see that all of them were beginning to stir and regain consciousness. She had been careful to use only the force necessary to neutralize each threat, and it appeared that none of them had suffered any permanent injuries. The leader would need stitches for his broken nose, and the big man would probably have trouble swallowing for a few days, but they would all recover fully. As the attackers were loaded into ambulances under police guard, Maya gave her statement to Detective Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had been called to the scene. Maya explained exactly what had happened, from the moment she first noticed the men following her to the final takedown of their leader. She was careful to emphasize that she had only defended herself and had used the minimum force necessary to protect her life. Detective Rodriguez listened to Maya's account with growing interest. She had dealt with plenty of self-defense cases over the years, but she had never encountered someone with Maya's level of skill and training. When Maya mentioned her martial arts background and her work teaching self-defense classes, everything began to make sense to the detective. The detective asked Maya about her training, and Maya explained her background in karate, judo, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. She talked about her sensei, Master Tanaka, who had been teaching martial arts for over 40 years and had insisted that his students learn not just techniques, but the philosophy and discipline that went with them. She explained that she had been training for over 15 years, starting when she was just 7 years old. As Maya spoke, Detective Rodriguez found herself impressed not just by the young woman's physical abilities, but by her mental composure and moral clarity. Maya showed genuine concern for the welfare of her attackers, asking several times whether they were going to be okay. She expressed regret that the situation had escalated to violence, even though everyone could see that she had had no choice in the matter. The detective asked Maya about her decision to fight, rather than simply surrender her purse and phone. Maya explained that her sensei had always taught her that predators rarely stopped with just taking material possessions. She had seen the look in the leader's eyes and knew that giving him what he wanted wouldn't have been enough to ensure her safety. Sometimes, she said, the only way to stop a bully was to show them that their intended victim wasn't as helpless as they appeared. Security camera footage from a nearby building confirmed Maya's version of events exactly. The grainy video showed the 5 men surrounding her, the loss of her training knife, and the incredible 83-second sequence that followed. Detective Rodriguez watched the footage 3 times, shaking her head in amazement at Maya's skill and precision. As the crime scene was processed and the last of the attackers was loaded into an ambulance, Maya began to feel the full emotional impact of what had just happened. She had always known intellectually that her training might one day be put to a real test, but experiencing actual life-or-death combat was completely different from sparring in the dojo. She felt proud of how she had handled herself, but also sobered by how quickly a routine walk home had turned into a fight for survival. Detective Rodriguez told Maya that she would probably be asked to testify when the case went to trial, but that based on the evidence and witness statements, she was confident that no charges would be filed against her. The 5 attackers, on the other hand, would be facing serious felony charges for attempted robbery and assault. Their criminal careers had come to an abrupt end, thanks to their decision to target the wrong victim. News of Maya's incredible victory spread through the community like wildfire. Within days, local newspapers and television stations were calling her, wanting to interview the young woman who had single-handedly defeated 5 attackers in less than 2 minutes. Maya initially tried to avoid the media attention, preferring to return to her quiet life teaching self-defense classes at the community center. But the story had taken on a life of its own. The security camera footage, which had been released by the police after the attackers were formally charged, went viral on social media. Millions of people watched in amazement as the small figure on the grainy video systematically dismantled her much larger opponents with precise, efficient movements. Comments poured in from around the world, with people praising Maya's skill and courage while expressing amazement at what they had witnessed. Master Tanaka, Maya's sensei, was not surprised by his student's performance. When reporters asked him about Maya's abilities, he spoke with quiet pride about the young woman who had been training under his guidance since childhood. He explained that Maya possessed not just exceptional physical skills, but the mental discipline and moral character that true martial arts required. He had always known that she was special, but even he was impressed by how perfectly she had applied her training under such extreme pressure. The community center where Maya taught her self-defense classes was flooded with new enrollment requests. Women who had previously thought about learning to protect themselves were inspired by Maya's example and wanted to develop similar skills. Maya found herself teaching multiple classes every day, passing on the knowledge that had saved her life to dozens of eager students. Maya used her newfound fame to advocate for women's self-defense education and to raise awareness about street violence. She gave talks at schools and community organizations, always emphasizing that physical confrontation should be a last resort, but that everyone had the right to defend themselves when faced with violence. She stressed that the techniques she had used required years of dedicated training, and that martial arts was about much more than just fighting. The 5 attackers faced serious legal consequences for their actions. The leader, whose name was revealed to be Marcus Johnson, had an extensive criminal history and was sentenced to 8 years in prison for armed robbery and assault. His accomplices received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years depending on their criminal backgrounds and their roles in the attack. The youngest of the group, the one Maya had shown relative mercy to during the fight, received the lightest sentence after his lawyer argued that he had been pressured into participating by the older criminals. During the trial, Maya's testimony was compelling and detailed. She explained her actions clearly and without boastfulness, always emphasizing that she had only used the force necessary to protect herself. The defense attorneys tried to argue that Maya had used excessive force, but the security camera footage made it clear that she had been fighting for her life against overwhelming odds. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding all 5 attackers guilty on all charges. Maya's story reached international attention when a documentary filmmaker decided to create a film about her experience. The documentary, which featured interviews with Maya, Master Tanaka, Detective Rodriguez, and several of Maya's students, explored the themes of self-defense, women's empowerment, and the importance of martial arts training. It premiered at several film festivals and won awards for its inspiring message and powerful storytelling. The impact of Maya's story went far beyond just self-defense education. She became a symbol of empowerment for women everywhere, proof that size and gender didn't determine the outcome of a confrontation when skill, training, and determination were on your side. Young girls who had felt helpless and vulnerable found inspiration in her example. while their parents sought out martial arts schools where their daughters could learn similar skills. Maya remained humble about her newfound celebrity status, always deflecting praise and credit to her teachers and her years of training. She continued to live a relatively simple life, teaching classes and working toward her advanced degrees in martial arts. She established a non-profit organization that provided free self-defense training to women in underserved communities, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't prevent anyone from learning to protect themselves. Years later, Maya would look back on that night in the industrial district as a turning point in her life. What had started as a terrifying encounter with 5 dangerous criminals had transformed into an opportunity to make a real difference in the world. She had proven that with proper training and unwavering determination, anyone could overcome seemingly impossible odds and emerge victorious.